South Park: The Fractured But Whole is the sequel to 2014's Stick of Truth, a non-traditional RPG in the South Park universe. This video is a feature focus on the combat system in the game, the good, the bad, the really special, because frankly there's a fair bit more depth in combat than one might initially assume. For reference though, because I'm going to be talking about a story-heavy game, I will be avoiding story-related combat sequences because I want to show you how all of this works, but not spoil the game for you. I played it on PC using a DualShock 4 controller. The video was done with review code provided by Ubisoft, and the game is out on PC, PS4, and Xbox One October 17th. So, much like the Stick of Truth, combat in Fractured is turn-based, and also, similar to how Stick of Truth handled it, there are effectively two different kinds of combat. There's scripted story combat, and then semi-random open-world encounters. With the scripted story battles, the encounter will trigger when you enter an area or pass by a certain position in the area, but with the open world encounters, NPCs will run after you and combat begins if they hit you. I mention this because you can influence these open world encounters by striking first with a ranged attack or melee punch, which lets you take the first strike in the encounter itself. Where it stands apart is that combat is handled on a grid of varying size depending on where the battle happens, much more akin to a tactical game like XCOM or Final Fantasy Tactics. Each square represents a single movement, and most of your characters have 2 squares of movement per turn, which can be augmented by equipping items or debuffed by a slowing attack. You take your moves, which aren't actually committed to until you select the type of attack that you're going to strike with. Enemies move around the battlefield a lot as well, and with attacks being positional, picking the right place to stash your characters is essential. In my experience with the game, the focus is rather obviously on giving you a huge amount of variety in combat. The Stick of Truth is more traditional, with items, armor, weapons, stats, and all of that kind of stuff. Fractured throws most of this out the window. Costumes are entirely cosmetic. There are no weapons. It has consumables, but it's pretty much just heals, status removal, and revival items. Everything in this game is based around the South Park kids' superhero personas, and each is vastly different from the next. Fractured has some crafting, but the materials are so common that you'll rarely run out of anything. There are also a few consumable items which act as once per battle summon effects, but honestly, while they're funny, I didn't find them all that useful, and you're very limited in how many times you can use them in a single playthrough of the game. Your player character, the new kid, starts out by picking a class from Speedster, Brutalist, and Blaster. As the game progresses, you unlock 2 more classes to use from a pool of 10 options. A much later point in the game, you get access to the whole gamut. Each class has 3 abilities and 1 ultimate attack. The abilities are all unique. They give a wide variety in whether they're area of effect, melee, ranged, status affecting, and such. For example, you could equip your character with a melee ability which does damage and has a bleed effect, a ranged ability that attacks the 3 squares in front of you with a knockback, a wide-ranging protection ability which lets you select who in a big area is going to get a buff, and an ultimate that targets a single NPC anywhere on the grid, and you can have those as your selections all in the same battle. You have to be careful though, because some of these abilities have a cooldown timer on them, so you might want to be thinking about what you're going to have the character do next turn as well. All of these abilities can be mixed and matched however you see fit, which does certainly mean you can make some terrible combination choices. To take that level of variety even further, there are 12 companions in the game that you can take along with you on the adventure. Some of them unlock later on, and there are occasional story restrictions for who you can have at which time, but other than that, you can pick whoever you want to augment your own abilities in battle. Each companion has their own set of 3 moves with an ultimate, and of course, for the visual enjoyment, each ultimate has a cutscene. And what the hell, let's take that variety further still. The new kid can also equip artifacts that you can find or craft, which give you and your party bonuses to certain types of attacks, or have other unique effects as you get to the upper tiers. You could, for example, select items that really boosted the amount of damage an enemy takes from status effects like bleeding and burning. Then you could choose companions that have status effect attacks, equip yourself with those as well, and really go ham on damage over time. Or maybe you would rather power your ultimates up faster, or recover health every turn, etc. Finally, I want to talk about 2 things specific to the new kid. In addition to the artifact, there's also the DNA strand, which doesn't affect the companions, but lets you choose certain types of attacks for yourself that get a bonus. Just be aware that there are also downsides to these DNA strands, as they will reduce other stats, but you can change them between combat whenever you want. And second, our hero does seem to have something of a flatulence problem, or maybe it's a good thing. Throughout the game, you will unlock a few abilities related to this. They have open world uses and combat uses, which do differ a little bit. In combat, there are primarily 3 things you can do. You can either freeze time for 4 seconds, allowing you to go up and punch an enemy a bunch of times outside of the combat turns. You can summon a clone of yourself from the past to help for a fight for a few turns, or you can force an enemy to give up its turn. I found that I didn't use the time freeze very often because it wasn't as good as you would hope. The summon a clone ability was good on occasion, but the one that really got a lot of use was forcing the lost turn, because from a tactical perspective, you can hit this ability after seeing what an enemy is going to do for their turn before it happens. So you can choose which attack you want to block entirely. All in all, the variety on offer here in combat is huge, with freedom of movement around the grid area, freedom of choice in how you like to play your team, whether an aggressive in the enemy's face style or a slower freeze and ranged attack method. You really get to pick how you play this one, even more so than Stick of Truth could ever hope to achieve. Now, of course, you're not the only one who gets to engage in some variety. The combat in Fractured can get a little bit hectic at times, because there's also variety in the style of encounters. Some encounters will be just a single one-on-one fight, but there are also much larger numbers that can come at you, oversized boss battles, hazards on the combat grid, and even a little bit of cheating here and there. So it's worth familiarizing yourself with the abilities on offer, because a knockback build is great for a large group battle, but terrible against an oversized boss. So I want to talk about what's really good about this, and I'm absolutely beside myself with joy over the variety and how I got to choose how to play the game. I tended towards a knockback build myself, primarily because it involved some of my favorite characters, and the in-party banter during and between combat was absolutely a blast. Being able to pick what costume I wanted to get that perfect superhero look without it affecting combat in any way was also pretty great. As much as I love the old school RPGs, being the type to pick function over form, my characters always tended to look like I got dressed in the dark. What really sets the combat apart, though, in my opinion, is just how much the variety impacts every battle. With the enemies having as much variety as you do as a player, every battle becomes a very tactical experience. Knowing how many squares an enemy can move in a turn, what the attack pattern on their ranged attack looks like, and what order the attacks are going to come in is absolutely essential, which results in your own positioning becoming just as essential. That was really the clincher for me, because battles throughout the game could be unexpectedly challenging and have some really hair-raising moments, mostly because of positioning mistakes and not thinking through the timing of the battle order. I didn't expect a serious tactics game when I sent my request out to Ubisoft for review code for this title. Now, you can't talk about any game systems without a little bit of criticism along the way. I've never been a fan of Quicktime Events. Fractured uses these QTEs in combat, and if you hit the QTE properly, it triggers a critical attack. Missing the QTE doesn't do anything bad, but I still don't really like that they're there. That said, it really only becomes an issue if you're constantly changing out the different abilities and different companions all the time. When you settle on a particular combination of attacks and companions that you like, it's pretty easy to get used to the attack pattern. You'll know that Captain Diabetes needs you to mash on the X button to critical one of his attacks, for example. Captain Diabetes is my second favorite character in the game as it happens. Or you'll get used to the idea that a particular attack from Fast Pass, yes, the handicapped kid's superhero name is Fast Pass, and he's also my favorite character because he's hilarious, that might only require a single X button press to hit a critical strike. There isn't a huge amount to worry about here, I just don't like QTEs. It does also have QTEs with the X button when you're getting attacked by an enemy, which gives a boost towards your ultimate ability charging bar, and fighting new types of enemies can sometimes make the QTE difficult to predict. One of the things that holds Fractured back a little bit on the tactical side is that the movement grid is really small. If the grid was larger, with area of effect and movement options involving more distance, I think it would be an even more impressive combat system. That said, I don't know that this would make it a better game. It was just something that occasionally bothered me, because it doesn't seem as though much would be holding the game back from letting you control 4 or 5 of your companions in a single fight instead of just 3. Now, I'm a bit of a min-maxer in RPGs, so one other thing that I'd like to give Ubisoft a bit of criticism on is the difficulty. I played the whole game on Mastermind, which honestly felt a bit too easy, though I was doing all of the side quests and really focusing on coordinating abilities for the highest possible damage. As much as I have confidence in myself on this one, I think that the highest difficulty should have resulted in more losses than ended up happening. There were certainly some very frustratingly difficult fights though, which is good. I'd like to close with my overall impressions of the game. South Park: The Fractured But Whole surprised the hell out of me. I played a very little bit of Stick of Truth and I didn't like it. Fractured had my attention the whole time, but it was the combat system, how it's structured, and how well it plays that really caught my eye. Well, that and how blatantly and intentionally offensive the game is. It's quite refreshing to see, in our current outrage culture, to have a publisher the size of Ubisoft willing to make a game that takes a stab at almost everyone. Seriously, you'd be hard-pressed to find a stereotype that they missed making fun of in this game. And for those who are curious, I clocked about 25 hours from start to finish. Oh, there was also one little combat thing that I left out. It's a Quicktime Event, and while I don't usually like those, this feature was a pretty fun random addition to the occasional battle. You hear a thing, and if you react quick enough to hit the button, you get in an extra attack. Enjoy.
Oh, is a little Porthy about to cry?
Microaggression. Hit him.
Normally, I try to get a review done to go live when an embargo lifts, because that's when it's most useful to gamers wanting to find out if a game is any good. I found that I didn't really like my own reviews, and I wanted to try an experiment, which is what this video is. Instead of a review, pick out a feature in a game that had the most impact on my enjoyment of it, and do a deep dive into how that feature works and explain it to folks. So I hope you found this useful and enjoyable. I did receive review code from Ubisoft for this video. I'm currently working on another of these focused on XCOM 2 and how certain changes that came with the War of the Chosen expansion really dialed up the emergent storytelling of the game. Until next time, my name is Tarmack. Thanks for watching.